Joining us now, Rabbi Yaakov Menken, America's rabbi from the Jewish Value Organization. I always forget the name of your organization, Rabbi. I don't even have it written down because I should remember it, but I can never. What is the actual name of your organization so I can stop screwing it up?
Good morning, and it's the Coalition for Jewish Values.
That's right. Coalition for Jewish Values, not the Jewish
People
Values
always
Coalition.
do Coalition of Jewish Values, as if we were the repository of all Jewish values.
Coalition for Jewish Values.
We're not. If I want to disavow
Rabbi,
being America's rabbi, I certainly have to disavow being, our organization being the repository of all things Jewish values. But we're certainly in favor of them, so therefore Coalition for.
I have made you and coined you as America's rabbi. So we're going to stick with that. Hashtag America's Rabbi, Yaakov Menken. Rabbi, I couldn't believe what I was seeing Monday. I couldn't wait to get you on. I'm watching this press conference, and I got these two U.S. congressmen, anti-Semitic statements, blasting Israel, and then leveraging, saying we shouldn't give Israel the billions of dollars of aid that we've been giving them forever because they're the bastion of freedom and democracy in the Middle East. We shouldn't do that until there's a two-state solution with Palestine. And then Tlaib cries, and Israel already said you can go and visit your grandmother. You can go to Palestine. They already said that. Then she doesn't want to go. Then she blames, Trump. What is up with these people?
Well, there are certain things that should not be partisan issues. And anti-Semitism is, of course, like any form of racism or bigotry, high on the list of things that should not be a partisan debate or discussion in America. It happens to be, when I called in to set up for our talk today, I heard the end of your last segment where you were discussing, I think it was Abigail Spanberger. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so she remarked that when she voted in favor of, providing supplemental funding so that children at the border, being detained at the border, should get food and should get medicine and should get help, and there should be the people working there, she was castigated for that. And she said, I've never understood, I just never got my mind around the idea that some people are willing to place partisan ideology ahead of feeding children. Because that's all that supplemental funding was about. But the left-wing squad, nothing gets in the way of their ideology. So there are certain things that we should not be debating that now we are, and anti-Semitism is one of them, as expressed by Tlaib and Omar in particular.
How did this happen?
How did it happen? How does anti-Semitism ever happen? Remember, anti-Semitism is just a German euphemism for an age-old hatred of Jews. And people keep trying to pretend, they don't hate Jews, they just hate Israel, they're against Israel, the country, they're against Israel's government. No, they're not. When you want to destroy Israel, no, by the way, there's nobody around the world who's anti a country. Where's the anti-North Korea movement? Anti-Saudi Arabia? Anti-Iran? The only people they say death to Israel and death to America. Because if you're against values, then you have certain countries you target.
How did they get away with it in the Democratic leadership? If a Republican did this, you know what would happen. They would be castigated by the lying legacy fake news media, and they would be run out of town. I mean, could you imagine? I told this to Denver Riggleman, who I just had on. I said, Congressman, what if Steve King had said this? I mean, they would change the locks on his door, right? He would have to, they would take his office away. Forget his committees. So a Republican says that they get castigated and run out of town on a rail. Democrats say this, and leadership sits on their hands and says nothing. Yet Jews have been voting for Democrats for years, and they're going to continue to do so. How do you reconcile that, Rabbi?
It should not be that a Jewish vote in the Democratic Party is taken for granted. It never should have been so. Republicans all know that those of us who support the president, for example, are because that his policy changes are friendly to the values we support. If he walks away from that, we're not going to be his supporters. And a lot of the very same people who are so wonderfully supportive of the president, I'm old enough to remember, they were not at all supportive of George Bush Sr. George Bush Jr. was a different story. Trump is an entirely different story. But, they were in favor of Bill Clinton because of Bush's hostility to certain Jewish values, including support for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats are just assuming that they can say and do as hostile as they want, and it's incredible to watch this double standard at work. And let's stop pretending it's about Israel.
Well, that's my point. And some of the statements they make are just so anti-Semitic and just no retribution, no consequence to their actions.
They recently, both of them, Tlaib and Omar tweeted out a picture of it was a cartoon that was drawn in the shape of an Israeli flag, but the Israeli flag blue bars were formed by the arms of Netanyahu and Trump, muzzling Tlaib and Omar with a nice little Jewish star in the middle. An obviously old anti-Semitic trope. This whole idea of shutting down dialogue is so clearly based on the classic, because obviously nobody is silencing them. They can spew whatever they want.
That's my point. That's exactly it. That there's no consequence or retribution to the hate they spew against Jews. Nothing from their party. Now, there is from Republicans, but then nobody pays attention to that. The only way they're going to pay attention to it...
nobody's paying attention to any of this. I mean, there's a tweet that Ilhan Omar sent out a few days ago that really should be front page, top column, top of the page, above the fold, et cetera, in every media outlet in the country, and nobody cares. What happened was, are you familiar that the Palestinian Authority shut down LGBT activity?
No.
There was an LGBT group. Yeah, see, this is the thing. Nobody hears about it. Nobody cares about suppression of Palestinian Arab rights when it's being done by the Palestinian Authority, because then you can't blame Jews. The
Right.
Palestinian Authority, this LGBT group called Al-Quds, which I think is a play on Al-Quds, which is the Arabic name for Jerusalem. Al-Quds planned to have a gathering, an activity, whatever it was. The Palestinian Authority said, no, you can't have it. And a fellow commented on Twitter, said, I'm positive Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and AOC will absolutely destroy the Palestinian Authority for this bigoted behavior. Right? Right?
Right.
Hello?
Right.
Okay. Ilhan Omar retweets that with the following comment. Pretending that this act somehow balances or mitigates Israel violating the dignity and rights of Palestinians or undermines a case for defending Palestinian rights is deplorable. Which means,
That's their
to
response.
summarize that, it's not about Palestinian rights at all. She took the bait immediately. She's not interested in talking about the far greater suppression of Palestinian rights than anything Israel has been accused of doing, simply because you can't accuse Jews of doing anything wrong.
Unbelievable.
This is the revealing moment here that it should be top media story all over the place. It's very clear that she just said, I don't care about Palestinian rights if I can't use it to bash Israel.
Exactly. Right. In fact,
if her agenda had been Palestinian rights, she never would have responded in that fashion.
No, she would have
Her
blasted
agenda
the
is
Palestinians
clearly
for that.
bashing Israel. She took the bait. I mean, he didn't even mention Israel. He simply said, of course, these women who care so much about Palestinian rights will now destroy the Palestinian Authority for doing something so bigoted and deplorable. And she takes the bait immediately. I don't want to talk
does
about
nothing.
that. I want to talk about,
Right.
Actually, this takes us back in history when Harvard University, there's a great example used by Alan Dershowitz. That at Harvard University, there was a time when there was a quota against Jews. And the president of the university said to the board, I don't want to admit more Jews. Jews steal. And Judge Learned Hand, who became a Supreme Court justice, turns to the president of Harvard at the time and says, but wait a minute, everybody else steals too. And the president says, yes, but we're talking about Jews now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care that Jews may not steal even at the same percentage, much less a greater percentage than anybody else. We're talking about Jews.
Sick.
That is Ilhan Omar. You're just using Israel as a convenient little fig leaf for her anti-Semitism.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, live, Richmond. We're with America's Rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Menken, and he is the executive director of the Coalition of Jewish Values. Rabbi,
No, Coalition
you're right.
4.
None of this. 4. Okay, let me get this
Remember?
straight. 4. Thank you.
We can't arrogate the claim to be representing all Jewish values. We're just in favor of them.
Even though I've had you on for 7 years running, I still can't get the name of your organization right. Coalition for Jewish Values, CJV. Now, Mr. Coalition for Jewish Values, let me just ask you this straight out. So you're right. None of this has been covered by the legacy fake news lying media. But here's what they do cover. The fact that the president tweeted out that this was a betrayal to Jews in America. And so the fake newsers took that and ran with it. So that's all you see now is the president's tweet. Nothing about what Ilhan Omar tweeted, nothing about their anti-Semitism, nothing about anything you just said. But it's all about the president said, if you're supporting Democrats, you're betraying your homeland, basically, not your heritage, is basically what he said, right? Innocent comment as far as, I mean, I saw the tweet. I didn't think anything of it, right? He said, okay, well, he's got a point with that. Yet that becomes the headline, and AIPAC and other organizations that represent the Jewish community, they didn't trash Omar, they didn't trash Tlaib, they trashed Trump. Now, break that one down for us.
They've sold out their Jewish values for leftist values, and they are desperate to avoid confronting the fact that the president has a point. And the best way to do that is to ignore the entire paragraph that he said and focus on this word disloyalty, because that's the word the president used. Now, if you ask me, I understand the president has Jewish grandchildren. I understand it is practically true that the Israelis certainly consider him the best president in Israel's 70 years history on Israel affairs. But that doesn't mean he's not Jewish. He probably shouldn't be talking about what Jewish loyalty is. It's like white people telling black people who's a black sellout, quote unquote. It's just like that doesn't go right. You let an ethnicity deal within its ethnicity. I get that. That's fine. That's great. But guess what? There's two types of disloyalty. There is an ancient, hateful trope of Jewish disloyalty where they don't care about the countries in which they reside. They only care about their home. That, of course, is an old hateful trope of which this was Omar. Omar so recently reminded us when she said that the only reason why congressmen support Israel is it's all about the Benjamins, because the Jews are buying them off. Because the Jews don't care about America. They care about Israel, right? Got it. That's the disloyalty trope. But that's not what the president was saying at all. And it's obvious that that's not what the president was saying. You put it in the context of that paragraph, he's saying it's disloyalty to your Jewish interests. He's appreciating the fact it's totally legitimate. The same way that black Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans do have legitimate, unique concerns, so too Jewish Americans. And Jews ought to be cognizant that the Democrats are trampling on the value of the Jewish community.
Well, that's the exact way that I interpreted it when I saw the tweet he sent out. And it raised like 0 flags for me. Just at first blush, I'm like, well, that makes sense, right? I mean,
they'd much rather talk about his use of the word disloyalty than Omar's use of the disloyalty trope.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when he said the word disloyal, it was like, well, you're disloyal to your ethnic heritage. I mean, that's
correct. And you put it in that.
That
you
perfectly logical
certainly look
to
at
me.
the context of what he was talking about. That has nothing to do with anti-Semitic disloyalty. The idea
Absolutely
that
not.
people are traitors to the country. And actually, look, Jonathan, what you were talking about the Jews who are deliberately not getting it. Jonathan Greenberg of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which was founded to combat anti-Semitism, claims that he doesn't understand which loyalty the president was talking about. If you understand English and you know anything about anti-Semitism, of course you know. You don't have to be Jewish. John Fredericks knows full well exactly what disloyalty the president was talking about. Why would Jonathan Greenberg pretend otherwise? And the answer is he doesn't want to deal with the real issue. And the real issue is that, sadly, the president has a point. It shouldn't be, by the way, that every Jew abandons the Democratic Party, but rather that the Democratic Party gets a message from the Jewish community that you should not assume that you have us.
Well, yeah, and I think that's exactly what the president meant. I'm not Jewish. I read that tweet. I thought nothing of it. In fact, I remember saying to myself, well, that makes sense. That would be like, okay, that would, I'm Catholic, right? So that would be like I'm in leadership and somebody gets up and they blast the Catholic faith and blast the Pope and blast the churches and say it's a religion basically that should be stripped of its tax-free status because of everything that's happened, and we always basically should just annihilate the Catholic Church in America. Well, I'm Catholic. I would take exception to that, right? So if I'm then voting for the people that are saying that, that would be disloyal to my faith. That's perfectly legitimate. That's what the president was saying. And but you nailed it, Rabbi. That's why I love having you on. You're so insightful. You nailed it. A lot of your leaders, Jewish leaders now in America, in positions of authority and power and influence, have sold out to the American left. That's more important to them than the original mission of why the organization even exists, like the ADL. You're so right. You nailed it. As always, that's why you are Rabbi, America's Rabbi Yaakov Menken. Thank you for being with us. You're the best.
Now I have to earn the right to have that title. Thank you. I really appreciate me being on and being called America's Rabbi, but just going to try to do our best to make sure that people get the message that there really has to be a change for the better. Thank you.
Executive Director of the Coalition for Jewish Values, America's Rabbi Yaakov Menken.